and it's under the first top. So that's beginning to look like this whole thing right here is one big topping distribution pattern. And the length of the base is the height of the move and vice versa. So maybe now we can probably from here over to here predict that we could get a move almost down to this level here on the decline coming out of that. And as we start to see the bars are getting bigger elongated bars means that's an impulse wave. So we definitely want to be short all the rallies in here. They only come back to the middle of the prior day basically. There's a big rally back. It comes only back to the middle of the bar. We want to keep shorting it and keep shorting it until we get down to a decent signal reversal bar. Now here you do have a little tiny buy signal, but notice there's absolutely no momentum here, and it really didn't even get up to the middle of this bar with this. So I don't know if you'd really take this on a actual basis. If it was a big bar that was coming up to here, I'd immediately cover and get out of the way. But a feeble little rally here, if I was still in here, I would not cover this yet. And then over in here, we have some inside days. So we still have some problems here that this is defining where a big seller came in. And it hasn't taken out the low, but the guy is still here apparently. He's working it, and then finally he's finished up. So we break out here, and then the bulls come back in. So there's a lot of things you can tell by just looking at these bars like this, and I would encourage you to spend a lot of time reading the actual bars to see what kind of information you can get out of them. Let's go back for a minute now and examine the bar chart under a microscope. You may notice in all these things I don't really have moving averages on my charts. While moving averages work and often can give you buy and sell signals, one of the defects of the moving average is it's relative only to the recent volatility. Once the market changes, all your setups will change. It's much more important to focus on the actual bars themselves because they contain all the information. And you'll be able to see all the information you'd ever get off a moving average and much more just by concentrating on the bars. Now, if you remember, the high of the low bar is the buy signal. Well, this is also like a genetic DNA. And there's a lot of things that go on here with these bars. Usually the width of the bar tells you a lot of information. For one thing, the width of a big bar like this can tell you something about a time cycle. If we were to take this bar and turn it sideways, and one way to turn it sideways would be to draw a circle around it, because at that point we can now say, okay, the length of this turned sideways goes out here. We find out that the actual width of that bar gives you something like this. And it can pinpoint the low often. It's not an accident that that happened. We can do it over here with this little bar too. And we will find that usually these highs and lows can often be pinpointed. This is off by maybe a bar, but a lot of the accuracy will depend on the accuracy of the individual bar. If you have a big giant spike, sometimes the big spike will throw you off a little bit. So we could take this one here, and this one might give us a prediction of how far we were going to be in this trade if we were long. So maybe we would find out that this would be until the 21st of June. It might be good for 2 or 3 weeks. That's still possible. It goes back down to a low in that time period, but it will say this is the amount of time this thing usually will spin out. We can also notice that these are also good for forecasting levels. If we took this high and took our retracement tool, and this time I put quarter gradations on it, but if we put on, here's the 50% measured this, so this is the length of the bar. This is exactly double the bar. So it often will tell us that the length of the bar in multiples is the distance we're going to travel. And on a bigger scheme of things, maybe we have it something like this. Here's 3 lengths of that bar from right here all the way over to there. And that's almost a perfect projection. So let's try another one over here. If we went over on this bar at the high, pulled it down to 1/4 Here's the pivot on 2/4, the pivot on 3/4. Not quite as exact. Maybe the bar was off a little bit, but you can still see that it does pretty well. Let's try it again over here on this last little high bar right here. And this one too. Now, if I continued this on, I could probably get bigger turns. Maybe on this first 50-cent one that doubled, maybe I could go up here now and do something like this and move down to that 50% one with my first quarter gradation, and then we see that it is a multiple. So all of these little signal reversal bars here are multiples of various highs and lows. Try one more over here. So here's the quarter point. And it's pretty close to where you're going. So the DNA basically is within this bar. Now, if you remembered before, I did the Jenkins natural ratio lines by taking a low to the first high. Well, you could do something very similar by just taking these various increments here and multiplying them. And that's what we'll try next. Let me just clear this screen for a second. So now we'll go down to one of these buy signal bars. And because this one took off right here and we didn't have a first top to do our ratios, what we can do is we can make the bar itself into a ratio because all the information must be encoded in that first bar. So if I click on the first little low and I click on the high, and now in the background, remember I'm taking a ratio, it's going to divide that top by the bottom, and it will do it automatically for me. And then we see that we are indeed catching a lot of these turns. They seem to be bouncing between my grid pretty well. Final top here. So all of these harmonics here really can be obtained springing out of this initial bar. And you could write these down on, this is a daily chart of Caterpillar, but don't forget you can do all these same techniques on a weekly and monthly. Now, turning the bars sideways and whatnot, when you get down to 15 minutes and 5 minutes, it gets a little sloppy, but it can be done, and I do it when I'm scalping a trade. In particular, the multiple measurements. And if we take those multiple measurements, they give us good target prices. So let's clear the screen again. I'll show you what I mean. What you can always do is if you don't want to use a retracement tool or something, you can actually do these multiples like this. Just draw again what the length of your bar is basically, and then just put that on top of it for a potential target if you're scalping. And you can do some measured moves and things of that nature to get a rough idea that if you were scalping a 15 or 20 minute chart, where would you want to take profit? Well, your minimum profit should be the width of this bar. That would be the size here. So if you bought down here anywhere, or even on this next bar, it's probably going to be at least one, if not two or three of these bars distance before you want to even think about taking profit. So initially you could have a big stop at the low here or at the midpoint of this bar. Then as we get up here, you move it to here and then start measuring your bars up. When you find out you're in this area here, at a minimum you may take a profit, but we see that you really continue on up from there all the way into here. And in this case, it just exploded, but at least you might be able to get a profit all the way up in here and then put a stop in at that point. It also gives an idea of where a big trailing stop could be. A trailing stop could be the width of the initial bar. So if you bought here and suddenly you're up over in here someplace, wherever it ends the day, you could put your bar and say, okay, my trailing stop would now be down here. And at the end of this bar up here, I'll have a trailing stop over here, which would stop you out fairly close to the high. So my point is basically study your bar chart, study each individual bar, get a feel for the magnitude of the bar, what they look like, where the spikes are, turn the bars sideways for time cycles. And these could be multiple cycles. Even though I did one circle, you could do 2 or 3 or 4 circles to get multiple time frames. But all the information you're ever going to need in trading is found within the bar chart if you look close enough. Starting with the big picture analysis using a weekly or even a monthly chart, We can use this idea that the DNA of the reversal bar at the bottom contains the information. We can even do it mechanically, something like this. We can take the high and the low and find out the range, and then just plot these individual ranges all the way on up for our support and resistance. And also, I put this glyph up here to show you how you can turn these things sideways. So you could turn this sideways to get some time cycles. We can also see the last leg down. If you took this bar right here and probably took this out into a square, you would probably get a target right down in here. But we can take this low bar, get our resistance on the way up, and we can turn it sideways to get some time cycles, and then we might see something on that would look like this to also give us our angles. If we turn our bar sideways, like I have in green here, I can then put one green bar over and draw an angle up through it. And I can do on the second level up one bar over, and so that would be like a 2x1, or the 4x1 usually if we set it to the very first top. And then this would be a 2x1. And then what I've done here is I've extended 2 bars. There's a bar there and there's a little green bar over here. And this one in this particular scale works much better as the 1x1. And we can see too, when it breaks it here, it did turn the trend down. So that's one of our primary angles. We can test the primary angle along the way, incidentally, by looking at these intersections of the angle with the horizontal support and resistance. And we see around here we have a low. The next level up gives us another big turning point low over here. The next level over here gives us another low. The next level over here gives us another low. So now we're starting to see our lows on the weekly chart, which are significant because you're getting 3 or 4 week rallies out of those. So you're pinpointing the lows, you're pinpointing your support and resistance levels. You have your angles on where they're going to walk up, and where they intersect the levels is where you get turning points, usually on an angle and a level. And all of this has been obtained from the simple little signal reversal bar DNA. I'd like to spend a minute now showing you some other techniques that I use when I'm trading E-minis in particular. This is a 15-minute E-mini chart. And many times you have to act instinctively and very fast as these things move quickly, and you get big bar reversals in only 5 or 10 minutes often. Although on a 15-minute chart, each of these bars will give you a full 15 minutes to get your strategy, note the midpoint of the prior bar, note where some of the higher lows and lower highs are, and some midpoints. But if I don't want to take the time to draw on all kinds of angles, the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the axis angles of where the move is. So for instance, let's pretend we're down over in this area, which looks to be a good little buy signal right here coming off this low. Now I pretend we don't see this information over here as yet. We're right at this point in time, and we don't know if we should take this trade or not. It does look like multiple bottoms in here, and yet this plunge was very dramatic, and we don't know if there's like an 8x1 angle or maybe a 2x1, or do we have to wait for a 45 to come down? You know, what should we do? Is it just going to go here or not? So the first thing I always do is say, okay, where does it, how is it in relation to the last swing? So what I'll always do is I'll take the low and I'll draw an axis of orientation right here. Now this particular angle up, according to the Ensign draw tool, says it's 75.5 degrees on this particular slope. But what I'm concerned about is an offset to that. Instead of drawing a 45 down off the top like you would normally, I want to offset 45 to that. So what I always do, and I've mentioned this before, is I always have a plastic triangle. I have 2 of them, a 45, 90 degree plastic triangle and a 30, 60, 90 degree plastic triangle. And I would urge you to buy those 2. They cost about $1 to $3 a piece. You can get them in the art supply store. And what I do in order to offset this, you can't see it, but I am holding up over this axis line right now, the side of my plastic triangle, and I am lining it up perfectly so the apex point of the 45 degrees is up here. Then I take my little draw line tool and I'll put it here at the top, and I would draw it down along the side of the plastic triangle. And when I click